Hello, welcome to Abdow Avenue, and today we have kind of a special video coming in. Since we're about halfway done with the year, I figured no better time than to get halfway dressed and discuss the best albums of the year so far. So I do not have the patience to go through all these albums so far and rank them in any order, because I don't think I've had enough time to let all of these albums sit with me enough to really rank them. And also, I don't want to spoil the year-end list, so I'm just gonna go off in alphabetical order. So if you get upset that something's above another album, it's just because it's in alphabetical order, no real reason. And because I've only covered like 4 of these albums on this channel, since I've only been doing this for about 2 weeks, I figured I'd probably talk a little bit more about the albums that I haven't covered. But again, I want to kind of make this quick, so just because I don't want the video to be any longer than it needs to be, I'm going to go through these albums kind of quick, just let you know my hot thoughts on them. So, first album we have is an album I recently reviewed. We have, and I got the list here, that's why I'm looking down, because I can't remember my favorite music of the year, apparently. So we got Algiers with The Underside of Power. We got this really political fusion between gospel and industrial rock and post-punk, and it's just an incredible album, a deeply political but also very, very dark, twisted, and beautifully written album. Definitely one of the better political albums of the year. I loved it very much. We have Arca with his self-titled album, Arca. If you look at this album cover and say, that looks really gross, I don't want to listen to that, then don't listen to it. If you look at that and say, wow, that's really creepy, I bet I'd enjoy something that sounds like that album cover looks. That's essentially what this album is, and it's all in Spanish, so I really can't give you too much insight on the lyrical content, because, believe it or not, I don't speak Spanish fluently. But this is a really wild, weird album, and it just, it's one of those albums that you listen to and it just kind of makes you feel a bunch of different weird ways. It definitely sets a lot of vibes, I guess. It sets a lot of tones, but again, great album. Really interesting electronic album. I'll just leave it at that. Next we have Brockhampton with their mixtape album Saturation. And this is a rap collective, kind of in the vein of something like Odd Future. The group all works together really well, and they create interesting little, I guess you could say bangers. They're really fun songs, I'll just say that. And there's 17 tracks on this, and they go by so fast, and only a few of them are like skits. So, highly recommend this album. This is one of the better hip-hop albums of the year. And it's a lot of fun. It's a great time. And you know, it gets serious at some points. It's definitely worth looking into. Just throwing that out there. Next we have Creeper with Eternity in Your Arms. I'm not the biggest fan of, like, kind of this emo punk music that the Creeper kind of stems from. It's a genre I used to be super into back in high school, and it just, not a lot of it's held up for me. But this album kind of reminded me of why I loved those albums so much, you know, like old Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy, and especially My Chemical Romance, like those kind of bands. Totally big influences here. And this is just a phenomenal album. It's definitely very melodramatic. I mean, the title, like, Eternity in Your Arms, I mean, you can imagine. But I feel like it does it a little more artistically and a little more interestingly. And yeah, this is definitely a fun, short little album. It's honestly one of my favorite of the year. I love this album so much. Next, I mean, I wouldn't consider this album as great as all the other albums, but I feel like it still deserves a mention because of just how shockingly great it was. And that's Harry Styles' self-titled album, Harry Styles. And he kind of goes back, not in his discography, but just in musical history. A lot of like 60s and 70s and a little bit of 80s rock. It's just dad rock music made by Harry Styles, and I mean, I knew right from the lead single Sign of the Times that this album was probably going to be better than it had any right to be, and it exceeded my expectations a little. You got songs like Ever Since New York, Two Ghosts, Even the closing track and the opening track, I feel those are both amazing too. There's just way more, there's a few, you know, more right than wrong on this album. I know that seems like a little bit, that doesn't seem too incredible to say for an album that's on the year-end list, but hey, check it out if you haven't already. It's surprisingly good. Next, we have one of my favorites of the year, Father John Misty with Pure Comedy. I loved his previous album, I Love You, Honey Bear. You might have seen me wearing a shirt for that in my last couple of videos. And this album, well, I don't think it's as good as that album. The lyrics, anyway, I think have improved. It's a political album without being directly political. Definitely, probably more social commentary on this thing. And Father John Misty, he's always been a little pretentious, and that's totally the case on this. But the things he chooses to write about and the way he writes about these topics, just look at a song like Ballad of the Dying Man or Total Entertainment Forever. I mean, those are just some of the singles. When the God of Love Returns, There'll Be Hell to Pay. This album's just filled with great songs, and even the title track, Pure Comedy, that's still one of my favorite songs of the year. I mean, this is just an incredible album, and one that definitely you should listen to. I know it's 75 minutes long, but it's totally, totally worth it. Next we have Japandroids with Near to the Wild Heart of Life. I always mess that title up. This one's a really fun album. It reminds me of kind of that 80s rock, Bruce Springsteen era of rock and roll, and while I don't think it's as great as their previous albums, I still think it's a lot of fun, and, you know, similar to what I said about Harry Styles, I think they do it a little better, but if you're into, like, dad rock, I guess, this is definitely an album to be checking out. This group is great, and definitely check out their earlier albums, too. They're just a very fun band. Next, we have an album I did review, Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit, The Nashville Sound. Like I said in that review, this is a very personal and somewhat political country album, and definitely one of the best things I've heard in country music in general, and the more I listen to this album, the more I love it. This is another one where I can't stop singing this album's praises. I've told a lot of people about it, and nobody has been let down by it, and it's his best-selling album. I'm surprised how high it ended up charting on the Billboard 200, so definitely check this out. It's a great, great record. Next we have Jens Lekman with Life Will See You Now. If you're unfamiliar with Jens Lekman, he's a singer-songwriter from Sweden? I think Sweden? I mean, the name sounds pretty Swedish to me. And this is like his pop album, I guess you could say. He has made like more quieter music up until now, and it's been some of the better albums of the last couple decades, I think. He's a really talented singer-songwriter, and while this album might not be as good as some of those other albums, this is definitely a really fun album. The production is amazing. Like I said, it's a pop album, but it still has great writing, and it's some catchy stuff. I'll just leave it at that. Definitely check this out if you haven't already. And just, again, like I said with Japandroids, just check out his earlier stuff too. This guy is super underrated. Next we have Joey Badass with All-American Badass. This might be my favorite rap album of the year right now. It's super political. This is probably, up with Algiers, was the best political content we've gotten this year. And yeah, I think this might be Joey Badass's best album to date. It's absolutely incredible. The guest features all, I think, work for the most part, and he's got some pop songs on here, and I wouldn't call them pop songs, but more pop-friendly songs that I'm a little disappointed never really crossed over into the mainstream. Songs like Temptations, just a great example right there, of just songs that, I don't know, I feel like if given the right airplay, could have been pretty big. But moving on, we got Kendrick Lamar with Damn. I have the vinyl back there, the signed vinyl actually, because I love Kendrick Lamar, it's no secret. And look, I mean, this is the best reviewed album of the year so far. Do I think it's the best album of the year? No. But do I think it's a bad album? Definitely no. It's not as good as his last few albums, but to me, Kendrick Lamar, on his bad day, is still far and above most rappers on their best day. I mean, this album, it definitely shows that he can make the bangers that people were saying that, you know, people have always accused him of only being able to produce these introspective, more thought-provoking, conscious hip-hop. And he kind of went out there and did what he does best, but, you know, to these really loud, banging productions. I mean, its lead single, Humble, was produced by Mike Will Made It, and it was amazing, I think. I still think that song is great. And, you know, you can't deny songs like DNA and Triple X and Fear. I mean, those are all wonderful, wonderful songs. This is a great album, and it has its low points, and I don't think it's as great as his other albums, like I said, but definitely worth checking out. I'm sure most people have checked it out. It's one of the biggest albums of the year. Next we have Lorde with Melodrama, the first album I covered, and the first A I've given on this channel, and my opinion on that hasn't changed yet. Melodrama is a phenomenal pop album. It's probably going to end up being one of the better pop albums, if not the best pop album of the year. I feel like this is definitely like the Lemonade of this year, where I was just kind of blown away by just how good Lorde could be. That was Beyonce, obviously, in 2016. I digress. Phenomenal album. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. It's great. Listen to my review. I go in way more detail there. Next we have Mac DeMarco with This Old Dog. Probably my favorite Mac DeMarco album of all time, which is saying something, because I'm actually a really big fan of Mac DeMarco. I really like Salad Days and 2. Even his smaller projects I've been a big fan of. Especially his last mini album, another one. That was great. But anyway, onto this album. What I think makes Mac DeMarco shine so much on this is just how personal I feel the lyrics are. A lot of it has to do with his dad, who kind of came back into his life recently, and he's kind of, I believe he's ill. I don't know if he has cancer or what the situation is there. I sometimes try to stay out of things that are that personal, but when the album is directly related to it, you kind of gotta bring it up. And not the entire album is focused on that, but it's definitely a huge theme. And I feel like this is probably just one of the most emotional Mac DeMarco experiences I've had. And I am loving this album from front to back. I really don't think there's any bad songs. I guess the worst I can say is there's a couple underwritten songs, but overall, great album, and definitely Mac DeMarco's best. And speaking of emotional, the next album we have is Mount Eerie with A Crow Looked at Me. And this is an album, out of all the albums on this list, this is the one I've probably listened to the least, and it has nothing to do with the quality of this album. It's just the fact that it's just so sad. It's just, for those who don't know, this is a project by Phil Everett, formerly of the Microphones, and it's basically him reflecting on his wife's passing. She died back last summer, and this is just, it came out very, very soon after her passing. He really only made this in a couple months, and you know, you hear on this album, he's kind of stamping the time that all of this is happening. You know, it's 2 weeks since she died, and 1 month since she died, and you know, it's definitely one of the most raw album experiences I've heard, and it's even hard to really critique it in any way. But yeah, I would say, if you know what you're going into, definitely check this out. It is an incredibly emotionally heartbreaking album. One of the most heartbreaking albums you'll probably ever listen to. But that doesn't make it any less beautiful. Up next we have the Mountain Goats with Goths. Trying to cheer myself up a little after that, but Goths is a phenomenal album, and definitely the best album the Mountain Goats have made, maybe even since The Sunset Tree, way back in 2005. I love this album. It's their first album without any guitars, which, if you know the Mountain Goats, that's kind of like their go-to. Their first few albums were just like pure acoustic guitars, so it's weird now that there's just none of that. but I think it makes them a little more experimental this time around, and it makes them a little more ambitious with what kind of production they're putting in. And the whole album focused on Gothic culture, like more modern Gothic, like the goth scene, not like vampires and 1400s Gothic stuff. But yeah, John Darnielle is still a great songwriter, and this band is still a phenomenal band. And if you haven't heard this album, please check it out because it's so good. And next we have Perfume Genius with No Shape, another one of my favorites of the year. This album just has such lush, beautiful production all around it, and while this is definitely some of the biggest production that Perfume Genius has ever worked with, it still feels really intimate. Just look at a song like Wreath. It's kind of talking about his battle with Crohn's disease, and while it's heartbreaking, the production is so beautiful, it kind of complements the pain really well. And so the next album we have is from a band that you probably aren't super familiar with unless you are familiar with the underground music scene in Boston, and that is Pile with A Hairshirt of Purpose. This is probably the best Pile album since Dripping, and if you're unfamiliar with Pile, that's totally okay. They're I guess a punkish band, a DIY band, I guess officially is what you'd call them, from the label Exploding in Sound, and this definitely feels like a very, I wouldn't say consistent album, because they tackle a lot of different sonic directions. They kind of take this in a lot of different ways, but it's very sonically diverse, and I think that they're totally able to pull it off well. I really do like this album, and if you haven't checked it out, which I'd be surprised if you have, because like I said, this is a kind of a small band, definitely check it out if you're into kind of indie garage rock. This is one of the best in that genre from this year. Next we have Remo Drive with Greatest Hits. This is an emo band that I think kind of celebrates what made emo music great to begin with. And instead of kind of bogging us down with these boring, overly emotional lyrics, which I feel that Creeper, like I mentioned earlier, kind of mocked in a way, they kind of bring the sound forward a bit. And they do their own thing, and they make just quality emo music. And while I don't think they're reinventing the wheel by any means, this is definitely still a really fun album. And if you're a fan of emo, this is probably going to be one of your favorite albums of the year because it's just so good. Next we have Roger Waters with Is This the Life We Really Want? Another really political album, but it's not really the politics of this album that I like so much. It's just the fact that Roger Waters was able to come back after I think like 25 years between solo albums, and just kind of deliver something that wasn't too weird for fans of Pink Floyd. And he makes music that I feel that all those old fans of Pink Floyd, myself included, would really enjoy. On the song Picture This, he even makes direct reference to Wish You Were Here, you know, with the lyrics, Wish You Were Here in Guantanamo Bay. I mean, that's just the kind of album this is, and I was very surprised by how good this turned out, because a lot of those aging musicians, they don't put out the same kind of content they did in their heyday, and while this obviously isn't like The Wall or anything, it's still surprisingly good. And next we have another really emotional listen for me anyway, and that's Sampha with Process. This is Sampha's debut album, and if you're unfamiliar with Sampha, he is collaborated with Drake, a lot of people actually. He's collaborated with Drake most famously, I'd say, Solange last year. You've probably heard him around. He was on The Life of Pablo with Kanye West, and I was really excited to see what he would do on his debut album, and I was floored away. A lot of this has to do with his mother's recent passing, and he kind of writes a lot of songs in that mindset, but about the process of, hence the title, the process of going through the grief. And the production is amazing on this album, a lot of electronic instrumentation, and his vocals are very emotive. This is just one of the best debut albums of the year. I really do love this album, and for a while it was my favorite of the year. I wouldn't say that anymore, but this is a really great album, and definitely one worth checking out. And next we have, sorry, next we have Spoon with Hot Thoughts. This is definitely a happier album. Spoon has been an incredibly consistent indie rock band based out of Austin, and I feel like, once again, they kind of raised the bar a little for themselves. This song is definitely a little experimental for them, but still captures what makes them great. Just listen to the chiller track, Hot Thoughts. That song is so much fun, and all the songs that come after it, even the instrumental songs, I didn't think were that bad. Songs like Whisper and I'll Listen to Hear It, and Shotgun especially. I mean, this album is full of little gems, and I really am enjoying this. I keep going back to it. Next we have SZA with Control. This is another great R&B album from this year. SZA is the first female artist signed to TDE Records, famous for obviously Kendrick Lamar, Schoolboy Q, Ab-Soul, J-Rock. Yeah, this is a phenomenal album. Definitely better than her debut EP or mixtape or whatever that was back in 2014, I believe. It was a while ago. But she definitely has so much personality on this album and such great writing. And even though there are some great features from Travis Scott and Kendrick Lamar, I think she's really the star of this album. And, you know, you look at a song like Prom or The Weeknd and Love Galore, I mean, the list kind of goes on, and she's just able, one after another, really deliver with these really emotional, but nonetheless amazing tracks. Definitely worth checking out. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot on this, so I apologize. But we only have a few albums left. One of them being Thundercat's latest album, Drunk. This one's a little bit of a slow burn, I would say. I don't think it's his best album, but the features, unlike with SZA, I think the features make this album so great. With the exception of that Wiz Khalifa feature, I didn't think worked too well. But the features on this album, you got Kendrick Lamar, you got Pharrell, you got people like Kenny Loggins on this album, the guy from the Doobie Brothers, whose name I am totally blanking on right now. But Thundercat is an incredibly talented bassist. He obviously worked with Kendrick Lamar on To Pimp a Butterfly, and I believe he worked with him on Damn as well. And his vocals are great on this album. It's just a lot of the same, and it's a lot of like really small, a little somewhat underwritten songs, but together I feel like this album overall is still really, really solid. And next an album I did also reviewed kind of recently, Vince Staples' Big Fish Theory. I really like the production all over this album, and Vince is proving that he's one of the most ambitious young rappers out there right now. And yeah, I'm just so impressed with this album, and hope that this leads to greater things in Vince Staples' future. And finally, the last album I want to talk about is from a band who I previously was never a huge fan of, but was really impressed with this latest album from them, and that is the XX with I See You. I feel like Jamie XX was able to come through with a lot of great production. Look at songs like Say Something Loving and On Hold and Dangerous. I mean, these are just fun kind of electronic songs. And then we have songs like Replica and Brave For You. Just slower, more sentimental songs that I feel that Rami and Oliver Sim are able to, they're able to deliver so well with the emotive vocals. And I'm just so impressed with how this album turned out. So that's the 25 best albums of the year, in my opinion. Again, in no particular order there. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the list, and hopefully I gave you a few albums to check out. And for the albums I have reviewed, of the like 4 or 5, I don't even remember the number, I will include links, and I will include like names and whatnot of all those albums, so you can check them out. I recommend all those albums. They're all got the Abdel Avenue stamp of approval. Do you agree with this list? Disagree? What are some of your favorite albums of the year? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.